The bus hissed as it pulled to a stop, its brakes exhaling like they were just as tired as Lenora Price felt. She stayed seated for a moment, hands folded around the strap of her canvas bag, letting the noise fade. The Greyhound station in Columbus was louder than anything back home. Engines groaned. Shoes scraped concrete. Voices overlapped in a way that made it hard to tell where one conversation ended and another began. Back in Meigs County, sound traveled slower. You heard a truck coming long before it arrived. You heard storms roll in. Silence there had shape. Lenora stood, shouldering her bag. It held 2 changes of clothes, her CNA certificate, and a folded photo of her mother standing in front of their house, smiling like nothing hurt. That photo had been taken before the hospital stays, before the bills came in envelopes too thick to ignore. She stepped outside and felt the city air settle on her skin. It smelled like fuel and rain and something metallic. Not bad. Just unfamiliar. This wasn't how she imagined leaving home. No goodbye party. No speeches about chasing dreams. Just a bus ticket bought with money she didn't really have, and a job she didn't fully understand. The email from the agency had been short. Private residence. Long-term care. High-profile client. Competitive pay. Competitive pay meant rent paid on time. It meant her mother wouldn't have to pretend she wasn't scared every time the phone rang. Lenora pulled out her phone and checked the address again. East Broad Street. Gated property. She laughed softly to herself as she typed it into the cab app. Gated. That word alone felt like a warning. The ride took longer than she expected. Downtown gave way to wider streets, quieter neighborhoods, then places that felt deliberately distant from everything else. Houses sat back from the road, framed by trees and fences that said privacy mattered here. When the cab slowed, Lenora leaned forward. "That's it?" she asked. The driver nodded. "That's it." Iron gates stood open just long enough for the car to pass through. They closed behind them with a low, final sound that settled in her chest. The house wasn't flashy. No fountains. No dramatic entrance. Just stone walls, tall windows, and a stillness that felt practiced. Like the house had learned how to hold its breath. Lenora paid the driver and stood there for a moment, adjusting her bag, smoothing the wrinkles from her shirt. She reminded herself to stand straight. To breathe. This was work. Honest work. She'd done harder things. She rang the bell. While she waited, her mind drifted back to the morning she left. Her mother sitting at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. "You don't owe me this," her mother had said. Lenora had smiled and lied. "I know." The door opened. A woman stood there with silver hair pulled tight and eyes that missed nothing. She wore slacks and a blouse like a uniform even though no logo marked it. "You're early," the woman said. "I took the first bus," Lenora replied. "Didn't want to risk delays." The woman studied her for a second, then stepped aside. "I'm Patricia Doyle. Come in." The air inside was cool and faintly sterile. Not unpleasant. Just careful. Floors shone. Furniture sat exactly where it should. Even the silence felt arranged. As they walked, Lenora noticed framed photos on the walls. Buildings. Ribbon cuttings. Men in suits shaking hands. Power frozen in glass. "Your client?" Lenora asked quietly. "Yes," Patricia said. "Jonathan Keene." The name landed heavier than Lenora expected. She had heard it before. Everyone had, in some way. Factories. Contracts. News segments that played in the background of diners and living rooms. They stopped in front of a closed door. "He's had caregivers before," Patricia said, her voice measured. "This arrangement is trial-based." Lenora nodded. Trial-based sounded fairer than temporary. Before Patricia could knock, a low mechanical sound came from inside. The door opened on its own. A man sat in a motorized wheelchair facing them. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable. His eyes moved quickly, taking in details Lenora suspected most people missed. He looked at her like he was weighing something fragile and expensive. "So," he said, "this is what they're sending now." Lenora felt the words hit, then pass. She didn't flinch. "My name is Lenora," she said evenly. "I'm here to help." Jonathan Keene's gaze lingered on her face, then dropped to her hands. "You can stay the week," he said. "We'll see. Not a welcome. Not a rejection. Just an opening." As Patricia excused herself, Lenora stepped fully into the room, unaware that this quiet beginning, this single week, would pull her into a life far more complicated than the one she'd left behind. And if you're listening to this story right now, standing at the edge of something unknown yourself, you might want to stay close. Sometimes the smallest decisions open doors you never planned to walk through. Jonathan turned his chair slightly, eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Let's begin," he said. Lenora nodded, her heart beating just a little faster, sensing that nothing about this house, or this man, was going to be simple. The first thing Lenora learned about the house was that it had rules no one spoke out loud. They weren't written anywhere. No list on the refrigerator. No binder on a shelf. But they existed in the way Patricia Doyle moved through the rooms, correcting a cushion with 2 fingers, adjusting a curtain by half an inch, lowering her voice even when no one else was around. "This way," Patricia said, already walking. Lenora followed, careful not to let her shoes squeak on the polished floor. The house was large but not echoing. Sound seemed to stop where it was made, as if the walls absorbed it on purpose. "This residence operates on schedule," Patricia continued. "Mr. Keene prefers predictability. Meals at set times. Medication administered precisely. No surprises." Lenora nodded. "Understood." They passed a living room that looked untouched. Cream-colored couches, glass tables without fingerprints, a fireplace that had likely never been used. A space meant to be seen, not lived in. "He doesn't come out here much," Patricia said, noticing Lenora's glance. "Most of his day is spent in the East Wing." They turned down a hallway that felt more personal. Family photos appeared. A woman with a reserved smile. A younger Jonathan, standing tall, one hand resting possessively on a building blueprint. A teenage girl in a graduation gown, her smile slightly forced. "His daughter," Patricia said. "She doesn't visit." The words weren't judgmental, just factual. They stopped outside a smaller room near the laundry area. "This will be yours," Patricia said, opening the door. The room was modest. A narrow bed. A small dresser. A window that looked out onto hedges trimmed into careful shapes. It wasn't home, but it wasn't hostile either. "I'll take you through the routine," Patricia said. "Then you'll begin." "Begin what?" Lenora asked. Patricia's lips curved faintly. "Learning him." Jonathan's room was larger than Lenora expected. Sunlight filtered through half-drawn curtains, illuminating medical equipment arranged with precision. Everything had a place. Nothing felt accidental. Jonathan sat near the window, facing outward. "He prefers mornings quiet," Patricia said. "No unnecessary conversation." Jonathan didn't turn around. "This is Lenora," Patricia added. "She'll be assisting you." "I heard," Jonathan replied. "I'm not deaf." Patricia ignored the remark. "She'll start with basic care. I'll be nearby." Then she left. The door closed softly, but the silence that followed felt heavy. Lenora stood still, unsure whether to speak. "You can move," Jonathan said. "I don't bite." She stepped closer. "I wanted to ask how you prefer things done." He turned his chair slowly, studying her again. "I prefer competence," he said. "Everything else is negotiable." She nodded. "All right." She began with the basics. Checking vitals. Adjusting his blanket. Explaining each step before she did it, but not over-explaining. Her hands were steady, practiced. Jonathan watched her closely. "You're quieter than the others," he said. "I was taught to listen first." "And what do you hear?" She hesitated. "Right now? A house that doesn't like mistakes." A corner of his mouth twitched. Smart answer. As she worked, she noticed how tense his shoulders were, like he was bracing for something that never quite arrived. When she finished, she stepped back. "Is there anything else you need right now?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. But don't get comfortable." "I won't," she said. The rest of the day passed in careful observation. Lenora learned the sounds of the house. The low hum of medical machines. The distant tick of a grandfather clock somewhere she couldn't see. The way Patricia's footsteps changed pace when Jonathan called for her. At lunch, Jonathan barely touched his food. "Not hungry?" Lenora asked. "Food tastes like obligation," he replied. She almost smiled but caught herself. Later, as she adjusted his chair, she noticed how his eyes lingered on the window. "Do you want to go outside?" she asked. He looked at her sharply. "I don't do tours." "Just the patio," she said. "Fresh air." He considered it longer than she expected. "Fine," he said finally. "But if you tip me into a rose bush, I'll make sure you regret it." "Duly noted," she replied. Outside the air was cooler. Birds moved through the trees with a freedom that felt almost rude. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. "Don't get used to this," he said. "Most people don't last." Lenora adjusted the blanket around his legs. "I'm not most people," she said quietly. He opened his eyes and looked at her, something unreadable flickering there. "Everyone says that," he replied. As the afternoon light shifted, Lenora felt it too, that sense of being tested, measured against expectations she couldn't see. And somewhere deep inside, she wondered whether surviving this house would require more than skill. Because Jonathan Keene wasn't just watching her work. He was deciding how much of himself to keep locked away. And Lenora had the uneasy feeling that once that door opened, there would be no easy way back. Jonathan Keene had a way of making silence feel like a question. The morning began without ceremony. No greeting. No acknowledgement that Lenora had entered the room. Jonathan sat angled toward the window, his wheelchair humming softly beneath him, eyes fixed on the thin strip of sky visible between the curtains. Lenora paused just inside the doorway, taking in the scene the way she'd been trained. His posture. The position of his arms. The faint tension in his jaw. "Good morning," she said, not too loud. No response. She waited a beat, then another. This wasn't rudeness. It was testing. She recognized it from residents back at the assisted living facility. Some people needed to know you wouldn't disappear just because they didn't make it easy. She moved closer, setting her supplies on the side table. "I'm going to check your vitals," she said. "Let me know if you want me to stop." Jonathan's eyes flicked toward her, sharp and assessing. "You narrate everything you do?" he asked. "Only the first few times," Lenora replied. "People like to know what's coming." He let out a short breath through his nose. "People like predictability. I don't." She smiled faintly, just enough to be human, not enough to challenge him. "Then I'll keep it brief." As she worked, she noticed how still he held himself. Not relaxed. Controlled. As if his body had become a place he managed rather than inhabited. "You've done this before," Jonathan said. "Yes." "With men who had opinions?" "With people who didn't want help," she answered. That earned her another glance. "You don't ask many questions," he noted. "I'll ask when it matters." "And who decides that?" Lenora secured the blood pressure cuff and met his gaze. "Usually the person who has to live with the answers." Something shifted then. Not warmth, but interest. Breakfast arrived on a tray, delivered by Patricia without comment. Jonathan barely touched it. "You should eat something," Lenora said. "I should do a lot of things," he replied. "Eating isn't high on the list." She considered pushing, then didn't. Instead, she adjusted the tray so it didn't press against his chest. A small thing. But his shoulders eased just slightly. He noticed. "You're observant," he said. "I was raised by someone who didn't say when she was hurting," Lenora replied. "You learn to look." Jonathan absorbed that quietly. Later, as she helped reposition him, his arm slipped an inch more than expected. Lenora reacted instantly, stabilizing him without panic. "Easy," she murmured. For a split second, Jonathan's control cracked. His breath hitched, sharp and involuntary. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I've got you." The words landed heavier than she intended. Jonathan stared at her, eyes dark with something close to anger. "Don't say that," he said. "Say what?" "Got you," he replied. "No one's had me in years." The room felt smaller. Lenora straightened, giving him space without retreating. "Then I'll say this instead. You're safe." He looked away, jaw tight. You don't know that, he said. The rest of the day unfolded carefully. Jonathan asked pointed questions about her training, her schedule, the agency. Lenora answered honestly but briefly. She sensed he was mapping her, placing her into a category he understood. In the afternoon she noticed something else. A faint scuff on the floor near his chair. Repeated marks. As if he'd been trying to move somewhere and hadn't made it. Do you usually position yourself here? She asked. Yes, he said. Why? The light's harsh at this angle, she replied. Might be why you squint. He paused. You telling me how to sit in my own house? I'm telling you why your eyes hurt, she said calmly. A long silence followed. Then Jonathan shifted the chair a fraction, testing the new angle. The light softened. He muttered. That evening, as Lenora prepared to leave the room, Jonathan spoke again. You know this is temporary, he said. Everyone leaves. She stopped at the door. Maybe, she said. But I don't rush exits. He didn't respond. As she walked back to her small room, Lenora felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. Temporary. Everyone leaves. She wondered who had taught him that lesson. And how many times. Behind her, Jonathan Keene sat alone, staring at the door long after it closed, realizing something unsettled him. For the first time in months, someone hadn't backed away. And he wasn't sure whether that made him feel safer or more exposed. By the fourth morning, Lenora understood that anger wasn't Jonathan Keene's weapon. Stillness was. When something displeased him, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't complain. He simply withdrew. His face went neutral. His eyes drifted past her, past the room, as if he were looking through a version of the world that no longer required her presence. It was unnerving. At the care facility back home, residents argued, cursed, even cried. Silence there usually meant peace. In this house, silence felt like punishment. Lenora learned quickly not to chase it. She went about her tasks with the same steady pace, narrating only what was necessary. Adjusting pillows, checking circulation, making sure the catheter line lay flat and unobstructed. Each movement deliberate, each pause respectful. Jonathan watched without comment. You don't feel quiet, he said at one point, his voice flat. I can if you want, Lenora replied. No, he said. Most people do. They talk like silence is contagious. She considered that. Maybe they're afraid of what shows up when it's quiet. His eyes flicked to her. A half-second reaction. Then gone. Later that afternoon she made a mistake. It was small. Barely noticeable to anyone else. She placed the blanket too high, brushing against his collarbone in a way that startled him. Jonathan's entire body stiffened. His breathing changed instantly. Shallow. Controlled. Too controlled. I'm sorry, Lenora said softly, stepping back. He didn't respond. She waited. Nothing. The silence stretched, thick and deliberate. Lenora felt the urge to explain herself, to apologize again, to smooth it over. She didn't. Instead, she adjusted the blanket lower, slower this time, then moved away. Minutes passed. Jonathan finally spoke. They always rush. She turned back to him. Who? Caregivers, he said. Doctors. Everyone who thinks efficiency is kindness. Lenora leaned against the counter, keeping her distance. Efficiency helps the schedule, she said. Kindness helps the person. Jonathan let out a slow breath. That distinction usually costs extra. She smiled faintly. Some things are worth the cost. He didn't smile back, but his shoulders eased just enough. As the day went on, Lenora began noticing patterns. Jonathan tolerated questions about logistics. Hated questions about feelings. He preferred to be told what was happening but not why. And he despised surprises, except when they worked in his favor. At dinner, he pushed his plate away again. You'll get lightheaded if you don't eat, Lenora said. Then I'll sit here lightheaded, he replied. She nodded. All right. She didn't argue. Didn't coax. She simply removed the tray after a few minutes. Jonathan frowned. You're not going to fight me on this? No, she said. You're not a child. That answer caught him off guard. Most people insisted. Most people needed to win small battles to feel useful. Later, as she prepared to transfer him to bed, Jonathan spoke quietly. You know Patricia keeps a log. Lenora paused. Of what? Of caregivers, he said. Their moods. Their mistakes. How long they last. Lenora met his gaze. Am I doing poorly? No, he said. You're doing differently. That word again. Differently. She helped him into bed with careful precision. When she finished, she reached for the light. Leave it, Jonathan said. She hesitated. It's brighter than you usually like. I know, he replied. I want to see the room. She left the light on. As she turned to go, Jonathan's voice stopped her. You haven't asked why I go through people so fast. Lenora turned back. Do you want me to? He considered the question. For a moment, she thought he might tell her to leave. Instead, he said, No. But you're wondering. Yes, she admitted. He nodded once. Good. That night, in her small room, Lenora lay awake longer than usual. The house made different sounds at night. Pipes shifting. Distant mechanical hums. The faint whir of Jonathan's wheelchair repositioning itself somewhere down the hall. She thought about Patricia's invisible log. About silence as a weapon. About the way Jonathan seemed to expect abandonment, as if preparing for it reduced the damage. The next morning, as Lenora entered Jonathan's room, she noticed something new. A thin scratch along the side of his wheelchair. Fresh. Not there the day before. Jonathan saw her eyes flick toward it and said nothing. And for the first time since arriving, Lenora felt certain of one thing. This house didn't just watch the people who came into it. It tested how long they could endure what was never said. Night settled differently in the house. During the day, everything felt monitored, purposeful. At night, the silence loosened, stretching into corners Lenora hadn't noticed before. Sounds traveled farther. The hum of the refrigerator echoed faintly. Pipes knocked once, then fell quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a clock marked time with a slow, deliberate tick. Lenora lay on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The room smelled faintly of detergent and something older, like dust that had given up trying to be noticed. She kept her hands folded over her stomach, as if that might keep her thoughts from spilling. She replayed the day the way she always did. The scratch on Jonathan's wheelchair. Fresh. Too clean to be old damage. He hadn't mentioned it. Patricia hadn't either. And Lenora knew better than to ask questions that weren't invited. Still, it sat in her mind, refusing to fade. She rolled onto her side and glanced at her phone. No new messages. Back home it was late, but not so late that her mother would be asleep. Lenora typed a text anyway. You okay? The 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. I'm fine, her mother finally replied. How's the job? Lenora stared at the question. How do you explain a place that feels like it's always listening? It's work, she typed back. I'm learning. She put the phone down before her mother could ask more. The next morning came too quickly. Lenora woke before her alarm, the way she had since arriving. She dressed quietly, smoothing her shirt, tying her hair back with careful hands. In the mirror she studied her face. No makeup. Slight shadows under her eyes. She looked like herself. That felt important. When she entered Jonathan's room, he was already awake. He stared at the ceiling, jaw set, eyes sharp. Morning, she said. Is it? He replied. She crossed to the window and adjusted the curtains just enough to soften the light. You didn't sleep well, she said. You make a lot of observations, he replied. Only when they matter. That earned her a look. Not irritation this time. Something closer to challenge. As she went through the morning routine, she noticed his hands again. So, controlled. But not relaxed. You don't have to hold yourself so tight, she said quietly, more to the room than to him. Jonathan's voice was flat. If I don't, things fall apart. She didn't argue. She'd learned that wasn't how you reached him. Later, while helping him reposition, she felt it. A faint resistance. Not enough to change anything. Not enough to call it movement. But enough to notice. She froze. Jonathan noticed immediately. What? He asked. Nothing, she said quickly. Too quickly. He narrowed his eyes. You just lied. Lenora steadied herself. I noticed something, but I don't want to assume. He watched her for a long moment. Say it. I thought I felt you push back, she said. Just a little. Jonathan stared at his arm like it had betrayed him. It's nothing, he said. That happens. Does it? She asked gently. Yes, he snapped. Drop it. She did. But she wrote it down later, alone in her room. Tom. What she'd felt. What he'd said. She didn't know why she was keeping track. Only that it felt wrong not to. The day moved on. Lunch passed mostly untouched. Jonathan answered emails through dictation software, his voice clipped, efficient. For a moment, Lenora caught a glimpse of who he must have been before the accident. Commanding. Precise. And used to compromise. In the afternoon, Patricia stopped Lenora in the hallway. You're settling in, Patricia said. I'm doing my job, Lenora replied. Patricia studied her carefully. Mr. Keene has strong reactions to caregivers. So I've noticed. Don't mistake his tolerance for trust, Patricia said. He doesn't give that easily. Lenora met her gaze. I'm not asking for it. That answer seemed to satisfy Patricia, at least for now. That evening, as Lenora prepared to leave Jonathan's room, he spoke again. You don't talk about yourself much, he said. She paused. I didn't think you were interested. I'm curious, he said, about what makes someone leave a place where everyone knows their name. She considered lying, then didn't. Because staying felt like disappearing, she said. Jonathan nodded slowly. That's a familiar feeling. As Lenora turned off the light and closed the door behind her, she felt something shift. Not comfort, not danger. Something quieter. Like recognition. Back in her room, she lay awake again, listening to the house breathe. Somewhere down the hall, Jonathan's wheelchair hummed softly, then stopped. Lenora sat up. The sound came again. Shorter this time. Like someone testing a movement. She held her breath, heart pounding, wondering whether she was imagining it. And for the first time since she arrived, she wasn't sure whether what she felt was hope, or the warning sign of something far more complicated about to surface. The movement happened when Lenora wasn't looking for it. That was what made it different. It was late morning, the kind of quiet stretch where the house seemed to pause between obligations. Jonathan had finished dictating emails and sat angled toward the window, eyes half-lidded, his breathing slow but alert. Lenora moved around him, straightening the side table, refilling his water, letting the routine settle them both. She reached for a warm cloth to wipe his hands. It was a small comfort she'd started doing without asking. He hadn't objected. As she lifted his left hand, her fingers brushed his palm. Something answered. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden lift. No grasp. Just a faint tightening, like a muscle remembering it existed. Lenora froze. She didn't pull away. Didn't react. She kept her expression neutral, her hands steady as if nothing at all had happened. Inside, her pulse raced. She waited. The hand twitched again. Subtle. Undeniable. Jonathan felt it too. His breath changed. He stared at his hand, eyes narrowing. Did you just... He began, then stopped. Lenora met his gaze carefully. I felt something, she said. Did you? Jonathan's jaw clenched. Sometimes nerves misfire. That's possible, she said. But this felt directed. He swallowed. You're reading into it. Maybe, she agreed. I won't assume. He watched her closely as if looking for excitement, hope, pity. She gave him none of those. Just calm attention. She finished cleaning his hand and set it back gently, resisting the urge to test it again. Jonathan exhaled slowly. Don't tell anyone. I wasn't planning to, Lenora replied. That answer surprised him. You don't think the doctor should know? He asked. I think you should decide that, she said. It's your body. He looked away, eyes fixed on the window. Doctors hear progress and start rewriting the story. I'm tired of stories. Lenora nodded. Then we'll let this be what it is for now. The rest of the morning passed with a careful tension neither of them named. Jonathan spoke less. Lenora moved slower, more attentive to how she touched, how she stood, how she breathed near him. At lunch, Jonathan ate a few bites without comment. That alone felt like a shift. In the early afternoon, while repositioning him, Lenora felt it again. A faint resistance. Consistent. Not random. She said nothing. Later, alone in her room, she pulled out her notebook. The one she used for schedules and reminders. She hesitated, pen hovering. Then she wrote it down. Date. Time. Left hand. Warm contact. Subtle contraction. She didn't label it improvement. She didn't label it hope. Just facts. That evening, Jonathan was restless. "You're quieter," he said. "I'm thinking," Lenora replied. "About what?" "About whether silence is always protection," she said carefully. "Or sometimes avoidance." He looked at her sharply. "Are you saying I'm afraid?" She met his gaze. "I'm saying anyone would be." He studied her for a long moment, then looked away. "People like progress," he said. "They start expecting things. I don't want to disappoint anyone else." Lenora felt the weight of that sentence settle in her chest. "You don't owe anyone a performance," she said. Jonathan laughed softly, without humor. "You haven't met my family." That night, Lenora slept lightly. Every sound pulled her awake. The house felt charged, like it was waiting. Sometime after midnight, she heard it again. The low hum of the wheelchair. Not moving across the floor. Just adjusting. Testing. She sat up, heart pounding, listening. The hum stopped. Then, faintly, she heard a breath. Controlled. Focused. Lenora lay back down, staring into the dark, knowing something had changed. Not just in Jonathan's body, but in the rules of the house. And whatever this was, whatever had stirred, it wasn't going to stay quiet forever. The library felt like a room the house had forgotten. Lenora discovered it by accident on a slow afternoon when Jonathan had dozed off earlier than usual. Patricia had asked her to straighten up the West Wing, a vague instruction that seemed to mean dust what no one touched and make sure nothing looked disturbed. The West Wing smelled different. Less antiseptic. More paper and old wood. The carpet muted her footsteps, and the air felt heavier, as if it had been holding the same breath for years. The library door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside, tall shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with books that looked expensive and mostly unread. Law texts. Business biographies. Hardcovers with titles embossed in gold. A wide desk sat near the window, its surface spotless, as if someone had cleaned it regularly without ever using it. Lenora paused, struck by how unused the room felt. No coffee rings. No bent pages. No signs of habit. She began dusting slowly, working shelf by shelf. As she moved, she noticed something odd. One section of books had been shifted slightly out of line, as if someone had pulled one free and slid it back without care. She hesitated. This wasn't curiosity for curiosity's sake. It was instinct. The same one that had told her to watch Jonathan's hands. The same one that had made her keep notes. She reached for the uneven spine and gently pulled. The book came away too easily. Behind it sat a thin manila folder. Lenora froze. She knew immediately she shouldn't touch it. This wasn't part of her job. This wasn't her business. But the folder was already sliding forward, gravity doing what it always did. She caught it before it fell. Her name wasn't on it. Jonathan's was. She swallowed and told herself she would just put it back. Instead, she opened it. Inside were legal documents. Court filings. Typed pages dense with language she didn't fully understand, but certain words stood out. Petition. Guardianship. Medical decision-making authority. Her chest tightened. She skimmed carefully, piecing together what she could. There was a brother. There had been a dispute. A recommendation from a physician citing emotional volatility. A request for increased oversight. Lenora's hands trembled slightly as she read. This wasn't recent. The dates were months old. But the tone was unfinished, like a story paused mid-sentence. She closed the folder quickly, heart racing, and slid it back behind the book. She returned the spine to its place, aligning it perfectly with the others, as if that could erase what she'd seen. The room felt different now. Charged. Like it had noticed her noticing it. She finished dusting with mechanical focus and left the library, closing the door gently behind her. Jonathan was awake when she returned to his room. "You disappear?" he asked. "Patricia asked me to clean," Lenora replied. He watched her closely. "You look like you found something." She kept her expression neutral. "Just dust." He didn't smile. Later that evening, as Lenora adjusted his tray, Jonathan spoke again. "People think money buys control," he said suddenly. "It doesn't. It just makes the fight quieter." Lenora's stomach tightened. "Have you been in many fights?" she asked carefully. He scoffed. "More than I planned." She waited. Let the silence do what it did best. "My brother thinks I'm incapable," Jonathan continued. "Not because I can't move. Because I won't agree with him." Lenora thought of the folder. Of the language she'd seen. Of the word volatility. "That must be frustrating," she said. "It's exhausting," he replied. "To have your mind intact and still be treated like a liability." She met his gaze. "You don't sound like a liability." He studied her, something sharp and searching in his eyes. "Careful," he said. "That kind of talk gets people in trouble around here." Later that night, Patricia stopped Lenora in the hallway. "You should avoid the West Wing unless instructed," Patricia said, her voice even. Lenora's heart skipped. "Of course." Patricia held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. "Mr. Keene values privacy." "So do I," Lenora replied. Patricia nodded, but her eyes lingered with a warning that didn't need words. Back in her room, Lenora sat on the edge of the bed replaying the day. The folder. Jonathan's words. Patricia's timing. This house wasn't just about care. It was about control. And Jonathan Keene was at the center of something far more fragile than his body. As Lenora lay down, she realized something that unsettled her more than anything she'd read. Jonathan hadn't asked her to leave yet. Which meant, whether he admitted it or not, he was letting her see more than he ever had before. And once you saw the cracks in a place like this, there was no pretending they weren't there. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. Lenora stared into the darkness, wondering who else knew about that folder. And how long before it stopped staying hidden. Jonathan spoke about it the next morning as if it had been sitting on his tongue all night. They were halfway through the routine. Lenora had just finished adjusting the footrest on his chair, making sure the pressure points were right. Outside, the sky hung low and gray, threatening rain without committing to it. "You know what changes first?" Jonathan said. She looked up. "What?" "People stop listening," he replied. "Not slowly. Not gently. All at once." Lenora stayed where she was, hands resting lightly on the chair. "Listening to what?" "To anything," he said. "Your tone. Your objections. Your preferences. Once you can't stand, they assume you can't argue." She absorbed that quietly. He continued, voice even, almost conversational. "Doctors talk over me. Lawyers talk around me. My brother talks as if I'm not in the room at all." Lenora straightened and moved to the side table, giving him space without disengaging. "That sounds lonely." Jonathan let out a short laugh. "Lonely implies you expect company." She met his eyes. "Did you?" For a moment he didn't answer. The wheelchair hummed faintly as he shifted his weight. "I expected respect," he said finally. "Turns out that's conditional." Lenora nodded. She'd seen versions of this before. Not with billionaires, not with lawyers hovering in the background, but with people whose voices had been quietly downgraded by circumstance. "When people stop listening," she said carefully, "they also stop asking." Jonathan's gaze sharpened. "Exactly." He watched her as if checking for something. Pity. Curiosity. Judgment. She gave him none of it. I still ask, she said, even when I think I know the answer. That's inefficient, he replied. Maybe, she said. But it's respectful. Something in his expression softened, just a fraction. Not gratitude. Recognition. The rain started shortly after. Light at first, tapping the windows like it was testing the surface. Jonathan watched it without comment. I used to hate days like this, he said. They slowed everything down. And now? Lenora asked. They make it obvious how little moves at all. She considered that. Or they give you permission to stop pretending things should. He turned toward her slowly. You always reframe things? Only when the frame doesn't fit, she replied. That earned her the smallest smile she'd seen yet. It disappeared almost immediately, but it had been real. In the afternoon, Jonathan asked her to read to him. Not business news. Not emails. A novel from the shelf by his bed. Something old. The pages smelled faintly of dust and time. Lenora read slowly, her voice steady. She didn't perform. She didn't dramatize. She let the words exist. Halfway through a chapter, she felt it again. A slight tightening under her fingers as she turned a page. Her breath caught, but she kept reading. Jonathan's eyes were closed now. His face unreadable. After a few minutes, he spoke. You feel it again, don't you? She stopped reading. Yes, she said. He opened his eyes and looked at his hand like it belonged to someone else. Don't say it, he warned. I won't, she replied. They sat with it. The unspoken thing. The fragile possibility. Later, Patricia appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Everything all right? She asked. Jonathan's tone was clipped. Fine. Patricia's eyes flicked to Lenora, then back to Jonathan. Dinner will be earlier tonight. Jonathan nodded once. When Patricia left, he spoke quietly. She watches more than she lets on. Lenora hesitated. She's responsible for the house. She's responsible for control, he corrected. That evening, as Lenora prepared to leave the room, Jonathan said something that stopped her cold. You hear me? He said. Not just my words. She turned back. Yes. That makes you dangerous, he added. Lenora held his gaze. Only to people who benefit from silence. He studied her for a long moment, then looked away. You should be careful, he said. This house doesn't like disruption. As Lenora walked back to her room, the weight of his words pressed in on her. Hearing someone wasn't neutral here. It was a choice. And choices had consequences. Behind her, Jonathan Keene sat alone, rain streaking the window in front of him, realizing something unsettling. For the first time since the accident, someone wasn't just managing his care. They were acknowledging his presence. And in a house built on control, that kind of recognition had a way of drawing attention, whether you wanted it to or not. The tension announced itself quietly. Not through raised voices or slammed doors, but through small changes. A pause that lasted half a second too long. A look exchanged when Lenora entered a room. A question that was answered with another question instead of clarity. Jonathan noticed before anyone else. He always did. It began with a schedule. Lenora arrived one morning to find the routine altered. Not dramatically. Just enough to feel wrong. Breakfast was earlier. Physical therapy was shortened. Jonathan's preferred afternoon rest was replaced with a family check-in. Since when? Lenora asked, keeping her voice neutral. Patricia adjusted her glasses without looking up from the tablet. Since it was decided. By whom? Patricia finally met her eyes. By people who have authority. Lenora didn't argue. She simply nodded and continued with her work. But Jonathan saw it. They're tightening the leash, he said later as she adjusted his arm brace. Who? She asked. My brother, Jonathan replied. And anyone who benefits from reminding me I'm dependent. Lenora fastened the strap carefully. Do you want me to say something? No, he said quickly. Then after a beat, not yet. That afternoon his brother arrived. Caleb Keene filled space effortlessly. Tall, confident. The kind of man who spoke as if the room had been waiting for him to begin. He greeted Patricia with familiarity, the staff with polite indifference. Lenora was invisible to him at first. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets. "You look well," he said to Jonathan. Jonathan didn't respond right away. "That's a vague observation." Caleb smiled thinly. Doctors seem encouraged. "They always are," Jonathan replied. "Encouragement costs nothing." Caleb's gaze finally landed on Lenora. "And you are?" "Lenora," she said. "I help with Jonathan's care." "From where?" Caleb asked. "North of Greenville," she replied. Caleb nodded, as if placing her in a mental file labeled temporary. "Well," he said, clapping his hands softly, "I won't stay long. Just wanted to discuss some transitions." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "What transitions?" "Minor ones," Caleb said smoothly. "Management. Oversight. Making sure everything runs efficiently." Jonathan let out a quiet breath. "You mean control?" Caleb's smile didn't waver. "I mean protection." "For whom?" Jonathan asked. Caleb's eyes flicked briefly to the wheelchair. "For the family." Silence settled, thick and deliberate. Lenora shifted her weight, suddenly aware of how the room had narrowed. This wasn't a conversation. It was a declaration. Later, after Caleb left, Jonathan stared at the wall for a long time. "He thinks I don't notice," Jonathan said finally. "That if he speaks softly enough, I'll confuse kindness with consent." Lenora hesitated. "He sounds practiced." "He's been preparing for this since the accident," Jonathan replied. "Just waiting for me to fade enough to justify it." "And are you?" she asked. Jonathan turned his head sharply. "Fading?" "Yes," she said. "Or are you still here?" The question hung between them. "I'm still here," Jonathan said quietly. "But being present doesn't mean being powerful." That night, Lenora overheard something she wasn't meant to. She had gone to the kitchen to refill a glass of water when voices drifted down the hallway. Patricia and Caleb. Their tones were low, careful. "She's getting too close," Patricia said. Caleb scoffed. "She's staff." "She listens," Patricia replied. "That's the problem." There was a pause. "Handle it," Caleb said, "before Jonathan starts believing he has allies." Lenora froze. Her hand tightened around the glass until her fingers ached. She returned to her room without making a sound. Sleep didn't come easily. Her mind replayed the words. Too close. Handle it. By morning the house felt different, like it was watching her. Jonathan noticed immediately. "You're quiet," he said. "I heard something last night," she replied. His eyes sharpened. "What?" Lenora told him. He listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. "So it's begun." "What?" she asked. "The part where they stop pretending," he said, "and start choosing sides." Lenora swallowed. "I don't want to cause trouble." Jonathan looked at her. Really looked. "You already have," he said gently, "by reminding me I'm not invisible." He paused, then added, "And now they'll try to remove you." Lenora felt a chill run through her. "Unless," Jonathan continued, "we move first." She frowned. "Move how?" Jonathan's gaze drifted toward the door, toward the quiet hall beyond it. "I've been silent long enough," he said. "And silence is exactly what they're counting on." Outside the window, the sky darkened again, clouds rolling in without warning. Something was shifting inside the house. And this time it wasn't the weather. Jonathan didn't explain his plan right away. That alone made Lenora uneasy. He waited until evening, until the house settled into its quieter rhythms. Patricia had retired to her wing. The staff rotated out. Even the lights seemed dimmer, as if the place had learned when not to intrude. Lenora was adjusting the blanket over his legs when he spoke. "I need you to do something," Jonathan said. She paused. "What kind of something?" "The kind that makes people uncomfortable," he replied. "Including you." She met his eyes. "Try me." He inhaled slowly. "I want a record." "A record of what?" "Everything," he said. "My care. My responses. My decisions. Dates. Times. Changes. Not interpretations. Facts." Lenora's chest tightened. "You want documentation." "I want evidence," Jonathan corrected. "Because the moment I push back, they'll say I'm confused, or emotional, or being influenced." "And you think I can help with that?" she asked. "I know you can," he said. "Because you already are." Quietly. Her mind jumped to the notebook in her room. The careful entries. The dates she hadn't labeled as hope. Jonathan watched her expression shift. "You've been writing things down," he said. She didn't deny it. "Only what I observe." "That's exactly what I need." Lenora hesitated. "If this becomes a dispute, they'll come after credibility." "I'm aware," Jonathan said. "That's why it can't look like rebellion. It has to look like care." Silence settled between them. "You'd be risking your job," she said. Jonathan's mouth tightened. "I wouldn't ask if it didn't matter." Lenora nodded once. "Then I'll be precise." That night, Jonathan asked for his laptop. He hadn't touched it in weeks. Lenora set it up, adjusted the angle, watched as his fingers hovered over the keys. His left hand twitched. Not enough to type. Enough to remind him it was still there. "I'll dictate," he said. He recorded messages. Not emotional ones. Clear statements. Preferences. Instructions. He spoke about his finances, his care, his wishes. He named Caleb once, calmly, without accusation. Lenora watched the man she'd come to know reclaim something essential. Agency. The next day, Jonathan requested a meeting. Not with family. With his lawyer. Patricia tried to intercept. "Jonathan isn't feeling well," she said sharply when Lenora mentioned the call. Jonathan responded from his chair, voice steady. "I feel clear." Patricia's eyes flicked to Lenora. "You're overstepping." Lenora kept her voice calm. "I was asked to place a call." Patricia's lips thinned. "By whom?" Jonathan answered. "By me." The lawyer arrived that afternoon. A quiet man with careful eyes. He asked questions. Jonathan answered. Lenora provided notes when requested, never elaborating beyond what she'd observed. Patricia hovered near the door, arms crossed. Caleb arrived late. He listened without interrupting, then smiled when the lawyer finished. "This all seems sudden," Caleb said. "Are we sure Jonathan understands the implications?" Jonathan looked at him. "I understand them better than you think." Caleb turned to the lawyer. "You should know Jonathan has good days and bad days." Jonathan spoke before the lawyer could respond. "Today is a good day. And it's been a good week." Caleb's smile tightened. "According to whom?" Jonathan's gaze shifted to Lenora. "According to the person who's been here," he said. "Every day." The room went quiet. Patricia straightened. "This is inappropriate." Jonathan's voice sharpened. "What's inappropriate is pretending my clarity threatens you." Caleb stood. "We'll discuss this privately." "There's nothing private about my life anymore," Jonathan replied. "And that ends now." The lawyer cleared his throat. "I'll prepare the necessary documents." After he left, the air felt brittle. Patricia spoke first. "You're letting a caregiver interfere in family matters." Jonathan looked at her. "She's letting me speak." Caleb's gaze locked onto Lenora. "Careful," he said softly. "You're crossing lines you won't be able to uncross." Lenora felt the weight of the warning. She met his eyes anyway. "I'm following instructions." Caleb laughed under his breath. "We'll see how long that lasts." That evening, Lenora found an envelope on her bed. No note. Just paper inside. A formal notice. Administrative review. Immediate suspension pending investigation. Her heart pounded. She folded the letter carefully, then went to Jonathan. "They've moved," she said. Jonathan read the notice, his jaw tightening. "So have we," he replied. He looked up at her. "They think removing you removes my voice." He paused. "It doesn't." Outside, headlights swept across the driveway as a car pulled in. Lenora felt a chill. Because whatever came next wouldn't be quiet. And it wouldn't be polite. Lenora packed slowly. Not because she had many things, but because every sound in the room felt amplified. The zipper of her bag. The creak of the dresser drawer. The soft thud of folded clothes. Each noise carried the same question. Was this the last time? She hadn't cried yet. That worried her more than tears would have. Downstairs the house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that meant decisions were being made without voices being raised. Lenora finished packing and stood for a moment, hand resting on the bed frame, grounding herself. Then she went to Jonathan. He was waiting. "You don't have to go yet," he said the moment she entered. "I do," Lenora replied. "If I stay after a suspension, they'll call it insubordination." Jonathan's mouth tightened. "They've already decided what they want to call it." She handed him the envelope. "I'll appeal. But that takes time." He skimmed the letter, eyes scanning quickly. "They're claiming concern for my well-being." Lenora gave a short, humorless breath. Funny how concern always shows up when control is threatened. Jonathan looked at her. "This is my fault." "No," she said immediately. "This is a consequence." He studied her face. "You're not afraid." "I am," she admitted. "I'm just not ashamed of what I did." Jonathan nodded slowly. "That makes one of us." A knock sounded at the door. Patricia didn't wait for an answer. "I assume you've seen the notice," she said, eyes flicking to Lenora's bag. "Yes," Jonathan replied. "I also assume you drafted it." Patricia's tone was cool. "This is standard procedure." "For silencing staff," Jonathan said. "Not protecting patients." Patricia stiffened. "You're agitated." "I'm angry," Jonathan corrected. "There's a difference." She turned to Lenora. "You'll need to leave the premises within the hour." Lenora nodded. "Understood." Patricia hesitated, then added, "You're not to contact Jonathan during the review." Jonathan laughed once, sharply. "You don't get to decide that." Patricia ignored him. "If you do, it will be documented." Lenora met her gaze. "So will everything else." Patricia's jaw tightened. She turned and left. The door closed with finality. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jonathan broke the silence. "They think isolation will soften me." Lenora zipped her bag. "It won't." He leaned forward slightly in his chair. "I need you to promise me something." She paused. "What?" "Don't disappear," he said. "Even if they try to make this ugly." Lenora met his eyes. "I won't." They sat in the quiet, both listening to the house breathe around them. When Lenora finally left, she didn't look back. The drive away felt unreal. The gates opening. The long road stretching out ahead of her. She pulled over after a mile, hands shaking, and finally let the tears come. Not loud. Just steady. She wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and drove on. 3 days passed. No calls. No updates. On the 4th day, Lenora received a message from an unknown number. "Jonathan has requested your presence." Privately. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She called back immediately. It rang twice. "Come," Jonathan said when he answered. His voice was tight. "Before they stop me from asking again." She returned that evening. The house felt colder. Jonathan looked thinner. Tired. "They've restricted my access," he said quietly. "Documents. Accounts. Even my schedule." "That's not legal," Lenora said. "They're calling it temporary oversight." "And your brother?" she asked. Jonathan's eyes darkened. He's accelerating. He hesitated, then said, "There's something I haven't told you." Lenora's stomach tightened. "What?" Jonathan exhaled slowly. "The accident wasn't the first time my body failed me." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I collapsed once before," he said. "Years ago." Briefly. "I was diagnosed with something they said was manageable." Lenora felt a chill. "What something?" Jonathan looked away. "A neurological condition. Progressive." The word landed hard. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked softly. "Because they use it," he said. "Every time I assert myself." Lenora swallowed. "And now?" "And now they're planning to declare me unfit." Her breath caught. "When?" Jonathan looked back at her. "Tomorrow." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Lenora realized then that this wasn't just about care anymore. It was about ownership. And time was running out. Lenora didn't sleep that night. She lay on the narrow guest bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly, counting each rotation as if time could be measured and managed that way. Tomorrow. The word repeated in her mind, heavy and unavoidable. At dawn, the house was already awake. Not with noise. With intention. Lenora sensed it the moment she stepped into the hallway. Doors closed that were usually open. Voices lowered when she passed. The staff moved with a careful distance, eyes avoiding hers. It felt like walking through a place that had already decided how the day would end. Jonathan was dressed earlier than usual. Someone had chosen his clothes for him. A pressed button-down. Slacks he hadn't worn since before the accident. Even his hair had been combed with unfamiliar precision. "You look like you're going to court," Lenora said quietly as she adjusted his blanket. He gave a dry smile. "That's because I am." She checked his vitals. Everything was stable. Too stable. The kind of calm that made people underestimate what was happening beneath it. "They're calling it an evaluation," Jonathan said. "Neutral. Objective." Lenora met his gaze. "It won't be." "No," he agreed. "It never is." The evaluator arrived mid-morning. Dr. Samuel Ortega. Polite. Measured. The kind of man who spoke gently even when delivering conclusions that carried weight. He greeted Jonathan warmly, shook Lenora's hand with professional courtesy, and set his briefcase down like it belonged. Caleb arrived 5 minutes later. Perfectly timed. He nodded to Dr. Ortega, then positioned himself near the window. Watching. Always watching. Patricia stood near the door, arms crossed, clipboard in hand. The room felt crowded without being full. Dr. Ortega began with simple questions. Date. Location. Jonathan answered without hesitation. Memory tests followed. Jonathan handled them calmly. Too calmly. Lenora could see the effort it took. The slight tension in his jaw. The way his left hand twitched when he concentrated. Then the question shifted. "How do you feel about your current care?" Dr. Ortega asked. Jonathan paused. "It's inconsistent." Caleb cleared his throat. "He's had some confusion lately." Jonathan's eyes flashed. "That's inaccurate." Dr. Ortega raised a hand. "I'd like Jonathan to answer." Jonathan nodded. "Some members of my household prioritize control over collaboration." Patricia stiffened. "That's not fair." Dr. Ortega scribbled something down. The questions became more pointed. About finances. About trust. About decision-making. "Who do you rely on most?" Dr. Ortega asked. Jonathan didn't answer immediately. Lenora felt her pulse quicken. "Myself," Jonathan said finally. "When allowed." Caleb smiled faintly. "And when you're not allowed?" Jonathan looked at him. "Then people speak for me." The silence that followed was sharp. Dr. Ortega closed his notebook. "I'd like a moment alone with Jonathan." Patricia hesitated. "Is that necessary?" "Yes," Dr. Ortega replied calmly. Reluctantly they stepped out. Lenora remained. Jonathan turned his head toward her. This is where they expect me to fracture. You won't, she said. He studied her face. You're certain? I've watched you fight through quieter battles, she replied. This one just has witnesses. Dr. Ortega leaned forward. Jonathan, I need you to be honest with me. Are you being influenced? Jonathan answered without hesitation. I'm being supported. There was a difference. Dr. Ortega nodded slowly. When the others returned, the atmosphere shifted. Less confident. Less assured. I'll need time, Dr. Ortega said. This isn't as clear-cut as I was led to believe. Caleb's smile disappeared. What does that mean? It means no immediate declaration, Dr. Ortega replied. I'll file a provisional report. Patricia's grip tightened on her clipboard. Jonathan exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders in a visible wave. But relief was short-lived. As Dr. Ortega gathered his things, Patricia spoke quietly. There's something else you should see. She handed him a folder. Lenora's stomach dropped. Dr. Ortega opened it. His expression changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. He looked at Jonathan. This medical history wasn't disclosed. Jonathan's eyes widened. What? Caleb stepped forward. We didn't want to confuse the process. Jonathan's voice rose. You used it. Dr. Ortega closed the folder. This complicates matters. Lenora felt the ground shift beneath her feet, because whatever was in that folder had just rewritten the room. And the fight wasn't over. It had only moved to a darker place. The folder stayed on the table long after everyone else stopped looking at it. Jonathan couldn't stop. He stared at the thin stack of papers as if they might move on their own, as if the words inside could rearrange themselves into something less dangerous. They never showed me that, he said quietly. Caleb folded his arms. You knew the diagnosis existed. I knew a diagnosis, Jonathan snapped. Not a strategy. Dr. Ortega's tone remained calm, but his posture had shifted. More guarded. Mr. Keene, these records suggest a pattern of progression that wasn't mentioned in your earlier statements. Because it hasn't progressed, Jonathan said. Not in the way they're implying. Patricia spoke smoothly. Doctors don't fabricate trends. No, Jonathan replied. But families curate narratives. The room went still. Lenora watched Jonathan carefully. The strain showed now. Not confusion. Pressure. Like someone forcing him to carry a weight that had been hidden until it mattered most. Dr. Ortega turned to Lenora. You've been involved in his daily care? Yes, she said. For how long? Several months. Have you noticed cognitive decline? Lenora answered slowly. I've noticed fatigue, frustration, and moments of fear when his autonomy is challenged. Dr. Ortega nodded. And memory? Consistent, she said. Detailed. Sometimes sharper than mine. Caleb scoffed. Caregivers get attached. Jonathan's voice cut in. So do brothers. The difference is motive. Caleb's eyes hardened. You think I want this? I think you planned for it, Jonathan replied. There's a difference. Dr. Ortega raised a hand. Enough. He looked at Jonathan. I'm not making a ruling today, but this file means further review. Independent specialists. Patricia's jaw tightened. That takes time. Yes, Dr. Ortega said. It does. After he left, the house felt hollowed out. Patricia was the first to speak. This isn't over. Jonathan laughed softly. It never is. Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're exhausting yourself. This fight will cost you. Jonathan met his gaze. So we'll surrender. Caleb turned to Lenora. You should go. Lenora didn't move. Jonathan spoke instead. She stays. Caleb smiled without warmth. For now. That night, Jonathan's condition worsened. Not dramatically. Subtly. His speech slowed. His left hand refused even the faint movements it had been offering. Lenora noticed immediately. You're overdoing it, she said gently. He shook his head. No. I'm reacting. To what? To stress, he replied. They know exactly how to trigger it. She adjusted his pillow, her hand steady despite the worry tightening her chest. Lenora, Jonathan said after a moment. If I lose ground? Don't, she said quietly. If I do, he insisted, you need to promise me something. She met his eyes. What? Don't let them rewrite me, he said. Not into someone I wasn't. Her throat tightened. I won't. He nodded as if that settled something. Later, long after the house went dark, Lenora heard footsteps outside Jonathan's room. She opened the door just enough to see Patricia standing there holding a phone. Yes, Patricia whispered. The stress response is already visible. Lenora's pulse spiked. Patricia turned sharply and saw her. They stared at each other in the dim hallway. Patricia spoke first. You should be resting. So should he, Lenora replied. Instead of being pushed. Patricia's expression cooled. You think you understand what's happening here. I understand enough, Lenora said. You're not waiting for him to decline. You're provoking it. Patricia stepped closer. Be careful. Lenora didn't back away. You already tried to remove me. What's left? Patricia smiled thinly. Time. She walked away. Lenora closed the door slowly, her hands shaking now. Inside, Jonathan slept fitfully, breath uneven. Lenora sat beside him, watching the rise and fall of his chest, listening to the quiet hum of machines and the heavier hum of intention behind the walls. She understood then that the real danger wasn't the diagnosis. It was how easily truth could be bent when power decided it was inconvenient. And somewhere in the house, someone was counting on Jonathan losing strength. So, the waiting became its own kind of pressure. Not the passive kind, but the deliberate kind. Every hour felt measured. Every decision delayed just enough to weaken resolve. Jonathan felt it. Lenora felt it. The house itself seemed to lean in, listening for cracks. By morning, Jonathan was worse. His speech came slower, as if each word had to be lifted before it could be released. His left hand lay still, fingers curled inward, unresponsive. The doctors would call it fluctuation. Lenora recognized it as consequence. They did this, Jonathan murmured, staring at his hand. Didn't they? Lenora didn't lie. They pushed you. Jonathan exhaled. Same result. She adjusted his position, careful not to rush him. The smallest movements mattered now. The wrong pressure could cost him hours of recovery. Downstairs, voices rose. Not shouting. Controlled. Strategic. Lenora heard Caleb's voice first. Calm. Persuasive. Then Patricia's, clipped and efficient. Words like liability and stability drifted upward, wrapped in professionalism. Jonathan closed his eyes. They're moving ahead without waiting for the report. Lenora stiffened. How do you know? Because they always do, he replied. This house doesn't pause unless someone makes it. Lenora made a decision she'd been circling for days. I'm leaving, she said. Jonathan's eyes snapped open. What? Temporarily, she added quickly. To get something. What something? Leverage. He studied her face. This is dangerous. So is staying predictable, she replied. She didn't give him time to argue. Lenora drove straight into town, heart pounding harder with every mile. She parked outside a small brick building that hadn't changed since she'd last seen it years ago. The sign was faded, the windows cluttered with flyers and notices. Inside, the air smelled like paper and dust. A woman behind the desk looked up. Can I help you? Lenora swallowed. I need copies of records. Old ones. The woman typed, frowning slightly. Name? Lenora hesitated, then gave it. The woman's expression shifted. Recognition. Curiosity. Something else. It's been a while, she said. I know, Lenora replied. I wouldn't be here if it didn't matter. While the printer hummed, Lenora's phone buzzed. Jonathan. She didn't answer. Not yet. When she returned to the house, the gates took longer to open. That told her everything. Inside, the atmosphere had hardened. Patricia met her at the door. You weren't authorized to leave, Patricia said coolly. Lenora held her gaze. Neither were you authorized to sabotage his health. Patricia's lips thinned. Careful. Lenora walked past her. Jonathan was in the living room, flanked by two unfamiliar aides. Temporary staff. Observers. His eyes found Lenora instantly. You came back, he said. I told you I would. Caleb stood near the fireplace, hands clasped. We were just discussing next steps. Jonathan's voice was hoarse. Without me. Caleb smiled. For you. Lenora stepped forward. I'd like to add something to the discussion. Patricia scoffed. You're suspended. Lenora didn't argue. She reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table. This is my history, she said. Background checks. Employment records. Prior evaluations. Caleb frowned. Why would we care? Lenora looked at Jonathan. Because they've been implying influence. She opened the folder. Inside were letters. Commendations. Formal reports. Testimonies from families. Doctors. Institutions. Years of documented professionalism. And one more thing. A notarized statement. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. What is that? Lenora's voice was steady. Before I ever came here, I worked in elder advocacy. I helped expose a conservatorship abuse case. The room stilled. Caleb's smile vanished. Patricia's eyes sharpened. You never disclosed that. I wasn't asked, Lenora replied. And it wasn't relevant until now. Jonathan stared at her. You knew how this could end. I recognized the pattern, she said softly. I hoped I was wrong. Caleb laughed once, sharp and humorless. This is absurd. Lenora met his gaze. Then you won't mind independent review. Silence pressed in. Jonathan felt something shift inside him. Not his body. The balance. Patricia spoke carefully. This changes nothing. Lenora turned to her. It changes everything. Because now there's a witness who knows the playbook. Jonathan looked at Lenora, something unreadable in his eyes. You came here to care for me, he said. But you were prepared for war. Lenora didn't look away. I came because I needed work. She paused. I stayed because something was wrong. Outside, sirens sounded faintly in the distance. Not for them. Not yet. But Jonathan understood then that this wasn't just a family struggle. It was a system test. And someone had just failed it. As the aides exchanged uneasy glances and Caleb's composure cracked, Jonathan felt the smallest stir in his left hand. Not enough to move. Enough to remind him he wasn't finished. And neither was this fight. The shift in power didn't announce itself loudly. It crept in through hesitation. The aides exchanged looks they hadn't before. Patricia spoke less, choosing her words with care. Caleb stopped pacing and leaned back against the fireplace, arms crossed, eyes narrowed as if recalculating. Jonathan noticed all of it. So, he said slowly, what's the next step now that secrets are out in the open? Patricia straightened. We proceed with medical oversight. Independent, Lenora added. Patricia's gaze flicked to her. That hasn't been approved. Jonathan smiled faintly. Neither was undermining my health. Yet here we are. Caleb pushed off the fireplace. Let's not dramatize this. Jonathan looked at him. You handed a selective medical file to an evaluator to influence an outcome. That's not drama. That's strategy. Caleb's jaw tightened. You're not well. Jonathan's voice hardened. I'm not obedient. The room went quiet again. One of the aides cleared his throat. Mr. Keene, do you want us to step out? Jonathan nodded. Yes. They hesitated, looking toward Patricia. Jonathan caught it. I said yes. After they left, the air felt thinner. Caleb sighed. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Jonathan tilted his head. For whom? For everyone, Caleb replied. This house, the staff, you. Lenora watched Jonathan carefully. The strain was still there, etched into the lines around his eyes. But something else had joined it. Resolve. You've been planning my absence, Jonathan said. Haven't you? Caleb didn't answer. That was rhetorical, Jonathan continued. I know you have. Patricia spoke then, voice clipped. Jonathan, this confrontation is affecting your condition. Jonathan laughed quietly. Funny. My condition worsened when you began pressuring me. Lenora stepped forward. Stress-induced regression is documented, she said, especially when autonomy is threatened. Patricia's eyes flashed. You're not a physician. No, Lenora replied. But I've seen this before. Caleb's voice dropped. That advocacy case you mentioned. You think this is the same? Lenora met his gaze. I think you're following a familiar script. Jonathan shifted in his chair, breathing heavier now. Lenora noticed immediately and moved closer, adjusting his position, grounding him with practiced ease. Caleb watched her hands. See, he said softly. He responds to you. That's influence. Jonathan looked up sharply. Or trust. Caleb exhaled through his nose. Trust clouds judgment. Jonathan's voice was steady despite the effort. Control destroys it. There was a knock at the door. Everyone turned. Patricia opened it to reveal a man in a dark coat holding a folder. Jonathan Keene? He asked. Yes, Jonathan replied. I'm here to deliver notice, the man said. Emergency petition filed this morning. Lenora felt her stomach drop. Caleb didn't look surprised. Patricia accepted the folder quickly. Too quickly. Jonathan's eyes locked onto Caleb. You didn't wait. Caleb's expression was smooth. I told you this would cost you. Jonathan's breath hitched. Lenora placed a hand on his arm. What kind of petition? Jonathan asked. The man glanced at Patricia. Temporary conservatorship. Pending court review. The word landed like a blow. Lenora spoke before Jonathan could. On what grounds? Medical incapacity, the man replied. Risk of undue influence. Jonathan laughed once, bitter. Convenient. Patricia closed the folder. This is for your protection. Jonathan's voice dropped. You filed this while I was under evaluation. Caleb met his gaze. Time matters. Lenora felt anger surge. You provoked symptoms to justify this. Caleb shrugged. We acted on what was observable. Jonathan's chest rose and fell unevenly now. The room felt too small. Lenora, he said quietly. They're trying to move me. She shook her head. Not without process. Patricia stepped closer. The petition grants interim authority. Jonathan looked at Lenora, something urgent in his eyes. If they isolate me. I know, she said. I won't let them. Caleb smiled thinly. You won't have a choice. Jonathan's left hand twitched then. Not faintly. Deliberately. Lenora saw it. Caleb didn't. Jonathan looked down at his hand, disbelief flashing across his face. Did you see that? He whispered. Lenora nodded, heart pounding. I did. He lifted his gaze to Caleb. You're running out of time. Caleb frowned. What are you talking about? Jonathan's voice steadied. Evidence. The man at the door shifted uncomfortably. I should go. Yes, Jonathan said. You should. As the door closed, Jonathan leaned back, exhausted but focused. They think this ends in a courtroom, he said. It doesn't. Lenora crouched beside him. Then where does it end? Jonathan looked toward the hallway, toward the rooms where decisions had been made without him. It ends, he said quietly, when the truth moves faster than they do. Somewhere upstairs, a door opened and closed. And Lenora knew the next move wouldn't be theirs alone. The night after the petition was filed felt longer than the others. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. No calls from lawyers. No urgent emails. Just waiting. The kind of waiting that let fear wander freely. Jonathan's room became the center of everything. Lenora barely left it. She documented every change. His breathing. His speech. The slight but unmistakable return of movement in his left hand. Now happening when he concentrated, not just by accident. "You need rest," Lenora said softly as she adjusted his blanket. Jonathan shook his head. "If I rest, they act." She didn't argue. She understood that kind of vigilance. Sometime after midnight, Jonathan spoke again. "There's something else you should know." Lenora looked up. "About the petition?" "About why Caleb is rushing," Jonathan said. He stared at the ceiling, gathering strength. 6 months before the accident, I changed my will." Lenora froze. "Changed it how?" "I added a clause," he said. "If I'm ever declared legally incompetent, my assets don't pass to family." Her heart thudded. "Then where do they go?" "To a foundation," Jonathan replied. "Focused on patient autonomy, disability rights, oversight abuse." Lenora's breath caught. "They'd lose everything." Jonathan nodded. "Control without reward holds no interest for people like my brother." Lenora sat back slowly. "So this isn't just about power." "No," Jonathan said. "It's about money they assumed was already theirs." Morning came with tension instead of light. 2 strangers arrived before breakfast. One introduced herself as a court-appointed observer. The other didn't introduce himself at all. They took notes, asked neutral questions, watched too closely. Jonathan answered carefully, conserving energy. Lenora spoke only when asked, her words precise, factual. Then came the request. "We'd like to relocate Mr. Keene temporarily," the woman said. "A controlled environment." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "No." The man finally spoke. "You don't have the authority to refuse." Jonathan looked at Lenora. "They're trying to separate us." Lenora stood. "On what basis?" "Medical necessity," the woman replied. Lenora didn't raise her voice. "Then show me the medical directive." The woman hesitated. "That will be provided." "When?" Lenora asked. "Soon." Jonathan laughed quietly. "That's not an answer." The woman glanced at her partner. "We'll return later." After they left, Jonathan sagged back into his chair, exhausted. "They're stalling," Lenora said. "Waiting for you to slip." Jonathan looked at his hand, willing it to move. It did. Slowly. Deliberately. His fingers flexed, just enough to curl and release. Lenora sucked in a breath. "Jonathan." He saw it too. Tears filled his eyes, not from joy, but from fury. "They almost took everything," he said hoarsely, "because they thought my body meant my mind was gone." Lenora placed her hand over his. "It isn't." That afternoon the lawyer called. Not the family's lawyer. Jonathan's. "I've seen the petition," the lawyer said. "It's aggressive, but sloppy." Jonathan straightened. "Explain." "They relied heavily on internal reports," the lawyer continued. "And they underestimated something." Lenora leaned closer. "You," the lawyer said. "Your documentation is meticulous. Time-stamped. Consistent." Jonathan exhaled. "Is it enough?" "It could be," the lawyer replied. "If we can show pattern and motive." Jonathan's eyes flicked to Lenora. "We can." After the call ended, Lenora felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in days. Hope. But it didn't last long. That evening, Caleb returned. He didn't smile this time. "You've made things complicated," he said. Jonathan met his gaze. "You made them cruel." Caleb's eyes slid to Lenora. "You should leave. While you still can." Lenora didn't respond. Caleb stepped closer to Jonathan. "You're gambling with your health." Jonathan's voice was steady. You gambled with my life. Caleb leaned down, lowering his voice. Tomorrow they'll move you whether you agree or not. Jonathan looked at Lenora. Then tomorrow, he said quietly, we show them something they didn't plan for. Lenora's heart pounded. What? Jonathan lifted his left hand again. This time higher. Visible. Intentional. Capacity, he said. On record. Outside, headlights swept across the driveway as another car pulled in. Lenora turned toward the window, a cold certainty settling in her chest. Tomorrow wasn't just another day. It was the deadline. Morning came with engines in the driveway. Not 1, 3. Lenora was already awake, sitting beside Jonathan's bed, her notebook open, pen resting between her fingers. She had barely slept. Jonathan hadn't slept at all. They're here, he said quietly. Lenora looked toward the window. Black vehicles. Tinted glass. No markings. The kind of arrival that didn't ask permission. The door opened without a knock. Patricia entered first, composed as ever. 2 aides followed, unfamiliar and stiff. Behind them came the woman from the day before, the court observer, and a man in a gray suit holding a tablet. Good morning, the woman said. We're here to facilitate a transfer. Jonathan's jaw tightened. I haven't consented. You don't need to, the man in the gray suit replied. The interim order allows. Jonathan raised his left hand. Not shakily. Steadily. Every eye in the room snapped to it. I can consent, Jonathan said. And I don't. The man faltered. That doesn't. It does, Jonathan interrupted. It demonstrates intentional movement, which undermines your claim of incapacity. Lenora's breath caught. She had documented this. Time-stamped. Video recorded it earlier that morning at Jonathan's request. The woman's expression shifted. That's not sufficient. Jonathan looked at Lenora. Play it. Lenora pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. The video filled the room with Jonathan's voice, calm and clear. He stated his name, the date, his wishes. Then he raised his left hand on camera, curling his fingers deliberately. The silence afterward was thick. The man in the gray suit frowned. This could be staged. Check the metadata, Lenora said. He hesitated, then did. Patricia's composure cracked just slightly. This is highly irregular, the woman said. So is what you're doing, Jonathan replied. I'm not refusing care. I'm refusing removal. Caleb's voice came from the doorway. You're delaying the inevitable. Jonathan turned his head. You're rushing it. Caleb stepped inside, eyes cold. You think a twitch proves competence? Jonathan lifted his hand again. I think consistency does. The woman glanced at her partner. We need legal. Jonathan smiled faintly. Already ahead of you. The phone on his table rang. His lawyer. On speaker. Jonathan, the lawyer said, we've filed an injunction. Based on documented coercion and symptom provocation. Caleb's eyes widened. That won't hold. It will pause, the lawyer replied. And that's all we need. The woman closed her tablet. We'll step outside. Patricia stiffened. We don't have to. Yes, the woman said firmly. We do. When they left, the room felt lighter. But the tension remained. Caleb stared at Jonathan. You've turned this into a spectacle. Jonathan met his gaze. You turned it into a siege. Caleb's voice dropped. This isn't over. Jonathan's voice was calm. No. But it's not yours anymore. Caleb turned and left without another word. Lenora exhaled slowly. You did it. Jonathan shook his head. We did. But the victory was fragile. Temporary. Jonathan leaned back, exhausted. His hand fell, trembling now from the effort. Lenora moved closer. You need to rest. He nodded. Just a minute. As the house quieted again, Lenora looked at her phone. A new message. From an unknown number. You should check Jonathan's old medical file. The one from before the accident. Her heart skipped. Because whatever Caleb had hidden before, he hadn't hidden everything. And the truth was still waiting. Lenora didn't show Jonathan the message right away. Not because she wanted to keep secrets, but because she knew the weight of new information could cost him strength. He had just fought harder than anyone had expected him to. His body was already paying for it. Instead, she memorized the words. Old medical file. Before the accident. That afternoon, while Jonathan rested, Lenora slipped into the small office off the main hallway. The one Patricia used. The one that was always locked. Except today it wasn't. She took that as a sign. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. Filing cabinets lined the wall. Neat. Labeled. Organized the way people organize things they didn't want questioned. Lenora found Jonathan's name quickly. There were years of records. Most of them matched what she already knew. Test results. Consultations. Progress notes. Then she found it. A separate folder. Older. Thinner. The diagnosis was there, but so was something else. A note from a specialist. Symptoms likely exacerbated by chronic stress. Environmental triggers significantly influence progression. Removal from adversarial conditions strongly recommended. Lenora's hands shook. This wasn't just about managing a condition. It was about who controlled the environment. Another page followed. Patient displays marked improvement in supportive settings. Regression observed when autonomy restricted. Lenora felt a chill. They hadn't hidden the diagnosis. They had hidden the cause. She took photos of every page. When she returned to Jonathan's room, he was awake, staring out the window. I found something, she said quietly. He turned toward her. Tell me. She handed him the phone. As he read, his expression changed. Not to shock. To recognition. They knew, he whispered. All this time. Lenora nodded. They knew your symptoms were tied to stress. To control. Jonathan's voice was hoarse. So every time I pushed back. They got worse, Lenora finished. And they used that against you. Jonathan closed his eyes. That wasn't coincidence. That was conditioning. Tears slipped down his face, not from weakness, but from the weight of it all finally aligning. I thought my body was betraying me, he said. But it was reacting. Lenora squeezed his hand. You weren't failing. You were being forced. Jonathan inhaled slowly. This changes everything. Yes, she said. Because now motive becomes medical. His lawyer arrived an hour later. Jonathan handed him the phone. The man's eyes widened as he scrolled. This is huge. They suppressed it, Jonathan said. So they could argue decline. The lawyer nodded. And if we prove intentional stress exposure. Jonathan finished the thought. Then this isn't guardianship. It's abuse. Lenora watched Jonathan as something deep in him steadied. Not healed, but anchored. Caleb didn't come back that day. But Patricia did. She stood in the doorway, composed but tight. You've been accessing private records. Lenora met her gaze. You've been manipulating medical ones. Patricia's lips thinned. You're overstepping. No, Lenora replied. You're being exposed. Patricia's eyes flicked to Jonathan. You don't know what you're risking. Jonathan spoke quietly. I know exactly what I'm risking. The truth. Patricia stared at him for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. As the door closed, Jonathan looked at Lenora. They built this cage carefully, he said. One file at a time. Lenora nodded. And now it's cracking. Outside, the sky darkened again, clouds gathering in a slow, heavy roll. The storm wasn't over. But now they could see where it was coming from. And for the first time they weren't standing in it blind. The hearing was scheduled for 2 days later. Not a full trial. Not a verdict. Just a preliminary court review to decide whether the temporary conservatorship would stand or collapse. 2 days felt like a lifetime. Jonathan's condition fluctuated. Some hours he was sharp, even wry. Other times he struggled to finish a sentence. Lenora recorded everything, noting how his clarity returned when the house was quiet and no one was hovering. The pattern was impossible to ignore. On the morning of the hearing, Jonathan insisted on dressing himself as much as he could. Lenora helped, steadying his arm when needed, giving him time. "I want them to see effort," he said. "Not perfection." They arrived at the courthouse under a gray sky. The building was old, its stone steps worn smooth by decades of stories just like this one. Caleb was already there. So was Patricia. Neither looked at Lenora. Jonathan's lawyer met them at the door. "We've submitted the suppressed medical file, along with your logs and videos." Jonathan nodded. "That's our spine." Inside, the room was smaller than Jonathan expected. No grand jury. Just a judge, a clerk, and the quiet gravity of decisions that changed lives. Caleb's attorney spoke first. Calm, confident, painting a picture of a fragile man influenced by a devoted caregiver. Lenora listened, heart pounding, as her own integrity was questioned with polished words. Then Jonathan's lawyer stood. He didn't raise his voice. He laid out the pattern. Stress, regression, control, financial motive, suppressed records. And finally Jonathan spoke. Not long, just clearly. "I am disabled," he said. "I am not absent." He lifted his left hand, slowly but deliberately. The room went still. The judge looked at him for a long moment, then down at the files. "I'm ordering the petition suspended pending full review," the judge said. "No transfer. No isolation." Caleb's jaw tightened. Patricia stared at the floor. Jonathan closed his eyes, breath shaking. Outside the air felt different, lighter. But as they walked toward the car, a reporter approached, microphone raised. "Mr. Keene," she called, "is it true your family tried to have you declared incompetent?" Jonathan looked at Lenora. She nodded. "Yes," he said. "And now the truth is on record." That evening, back at the house, the gates opened without delay. Inside, the rooms felt unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves were reconsidering whose side they were on. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. "They won't stop." "No," Lenora agreed. "But neither will we." His phone buzzed. A message from Caleb. "You've won a delay, not the war." Jonathan showed it to Lenora. She didn't flinch. "Wars are won by evidence." Jonathan smiled faintly. Outside, lights flickered on across the estate. The house was no longer quiet. It was waiting. And so were they. The house didn't feel victorious. It felt exposed. For the first time since Lenora had arrived months earlier, the rooms weren't whispering behind closed doors. Staff moved without glancing over their shoulders. The gates no longer paused before opening. Even the air seemed lighter, though the tension had not disappeared. It had simply changed shape. Jonathan sat by the window in the late afternoon light, watching the trees sway slowly beyond the glass. His left hand rested on the arm of his chair, fingers curled but no longer lifeless. Lenora sat beside him, notebook open as always. "You don't have to keep writing every second," Jonathan said quietly. "I know," she replied. "But it helps me see patterns." "And you've seen enough," he said. She looked at him. "I've seen you fight." Jonathan let out a soft breath. "I didn't know I still could." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the house. Then Jonathan spoke again. "I keep thinking about that file," he said. "The one they hid." Lenora nodded. "The one that explained everything." "No," Jonathan corrected. "The one that proved it wasn't all in my head." His voice cracked slightly. "I spent years believing I was losing myself. Every lapse, every weakness. I thought it was me failing." Lenora reached out, resting her hand lightly over his. "You weren't failing. You were surviving." Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, something had softened. "They almost convinced me I didn't deserve my own life," he said. That's the cruelest part. A knock came at the door. Not sharp. Not demanding. Just a knock. Lenora stood and opened it. The lawyer stepped inside, folder in hand. The judge approved the independent medical team, he said. They'll be here tomorrow. No family involvement. No internal staff. Jonathan nodded. And the petition? Effectively neutralized, the lawyer replied. Your brother can still fight, but it won't be from inside this house anymore. Lenora exhaled slowly. After the lawyer left, Jonathan looked at her. You stayed, he said. I told you I would, she replied. No, he said softly. You stayed when it was dangerous. Lenora didn't know what to say to that, so she said the truth. I stayed because something about you felt familiar. Jonathan frowned slightly. Familiar how? Like someone who'd been told too many times to be quiet, she said. I know what that does to a person. Jonathan studied her. You never told me much about your past. Lenora hesitated, then smiled faintly. Maybe someday. He nodded. No pressure. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Jonathan did something no one had seen him do since before the accident. He reached for his mug. Not quickly. Not smoothly. But on his own. Lenora watched, heart in her throat, as his left hand closed around the handle. It shook. The mug wobbled. But it didn't fall. Jonathan looked at her, eyes wide. I'm doing it, he whispered. You are? Lenora said. He lifted it just a fraction of an inch. Enough. Tears slipped down his face, unashamed this time. They said it was over, he said. They said this was as good as it would get. Lenora smiled softly. They weren't standing where you're standing. He laughed quietly through the tears. Later that night, Jonathan asked her something unexpected. What happens to you after all this? He said. Lenora paused. I don't know. I was suspended, remember? He nodded. I can fix that. She shook her head gently. I didn't stay for a paycheck. I know, he said. But I don't want you gone just because the crisis ended. Lenora met his gaze. You don't need me to fight for you forever. Jonathan's voice was steady. No. But I'd like you here while I learn how to stand again. The words weren't romantic. They were something deeper. Respect. The next morning, the independent doctors arrived. They spoke with Jonathan. With Lenora. They reviewed the suppressed file. They watched him move, struggle, recover. And for the first time, Jonathan felt like someone was finally seeing the whole picture. Not just what was broken, but what was still there. Caleb never came back to the house. Patricia resigned 2 weeks later. The foundation Jonathan had created quietly before the accident became very public, very fast. Not out of revenge, but out of purpose. Lenora stayed. Not because she was needed, but because she was wanted. And as Jonathan slowly regained more movement, more control, more of himself, something else grew too. Trust. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset bleed orange across the sky, Jonathan said, You didn't just care for me. Lenora looked at him. You reminded me who I was, he said. She smiled. You did that yourself. He shook his head. Sometimes you just need someone to refuse to believe the lie. The house was quiet. Not with secrecy, but with peace. If this story touched you, if you felt the tension, the fear, and the quiet hope woven through Jonathan and Lenora's journey, take a moment to like and subscribe. It helps stories like this find more hearts that need them. And if you want, share in the comments where you're listening from or what part moved you most. Some stories don't end with miracles. They end with something better. The truth.